to crypto-clothesline. We're glad to be here with you. Hanging out the crypto laundry. Getting all the crypto info for you. Crypto-clothesline. Crypto-clothesline.
Amy Rose, how are you going this week?
I am voiceless.
You sound very husky.
I am. I'm pretty sexy today, I have to say. Half PJs on the bottom. Been recording some videos, so I've got a really nice top on. I was pantless actually until very recently. I had to go to the door and get a parcel, and so now I'm fully clothed, but definitely two separate people happening.
You've got a Newsreader Syndrome going on.
Well, Pants Off Friday. Have you heard of that?
No.
It's a thing, abheeti. I'm just telling you, Pants Off Friday, and if it's not, I just created it.
Well, I am just in awe of the constant vertical learning curve I have in being your friend.
My pleasure.
We've got a really cool lineup this week. So speaking to Mayor Brad-Pettitt of the city of Fremantle, who has had a lot of connection with Power Ledger in trialling this peer-to-peer solar energy exchange. And we actually got to hear both of these men speaking live yesterday. So Brad-Pettitt from the city of Fremantle and Dave Martin, who is the managing director of Power Ledger. And fascinating. It's all happening in the city of Freo right here in little old Western Australia. Actually big old Western Australia.
And I think Power Ledger, even though they are amazing, I think they do owe a little bit of their success to the city of Fremantle and Brad-Pettitt, because he's the one who spearheaded that initial, I guess, testing of their technology.
They all talked about, in the whole blockchain crypto world, they always talk about a use case, but also a proof of concept. So actually not just talking about it, not just talking the talk, but walking the walk. And so I think largely the city of Freo has been involved with that because of the sustainability initiatives, which is quite the flavour of the month. It's actually quite the flavour of Freo. And I think that this local, and also the connection between Dr Jemma Green and Dr Brad-Pettitt, I mean, they're sort of, friends from uni, or somehow they know each other through uni connections, but also through local government. So I think it's a very positive example of that kind of corporate government handshake. It's great. For all intensive purposes, it appears to be something where both parties want to move forward in terms of this technology which can embrace sustainability, which I think Brad-Pettitt spoke about it yesterday when we heard him speaking live.
So another thing that Dr Brad-Pettitt, the mayor of Fremantle, spoke about how he was willing to consider having voting on the blockchain. I think he was a bit scared. He didn't want to go too far into it, didn't want to commit to anything, but we did discuss voting on the blockchain and he was quite positive about it. But whether he does it or not, who knows, or whether he spearheads it or not.
Well, as you'll hear when you listen to the interview, it was about voting on the blockchain and getting votes recorded so that so that you can't have any nasty business, any sort of compromising of the truth. But the other aspect that he talked about is people actually being able to make a stance between elections, because there's that whole kind of farcical situation where politicians make promises at pre-election campaign level, which then often don't get realised during the course of their term if they come into power. And so he also touches on that. And it was pretty sticky conversation for somebody who's in local government.
He was putting his foot in it. But the main reason we were addressing it is because we need transparency in the government. And that's why we got Sophie on, Sophie Mat, who has been in the banking industry for many, many years. And she's so well-spoken, isn't she? She's like a zen at speech.
So Sophie comments on the transparency in the voting, but she also goes on to make other really telling commentary on a wider perspective of using blockchain in politics. But I did just want to say one quick thing. I don't actually think he put his foot in it. I actually think he was incredibly transparent, for using the term of the day, and quite courageous. I had a level of admiration for a local politician who was saying, yes, we need to make voting more transparent. And he even said that he thought that, a few of his colleagues would be very anti the whole notion.
Well, yeah, that's why I said he's put his foot in it, because he's accountable to every word that he says to the electorate. So, he says that to us and we're like, you said so, Brad. Here is here's a platform for you to start getting votes on.
Yeah, and I think the fact that he's got this handshake thing happening with Power Ledger already shows that he has a sympathy, an openness towards this sort of technology, blockchain full stop. He's the first to say, I'm no expert on this, but with the taste that he's had in having this relationship with Power Ledger and sort of launching it in a public way. I mean, they've got the whole Smart Cities campaign going on, and that's incorporating different universities like Murdoch University, Curtin University, all sorts of different power tanks, think tanks coming together to test out this peer-to-peer solar exchange. And they're actually doing that at the next level now in White Gum Valley between 2 apartment blocks. So it's pretty groovy.
But getting back to the voting thing, I know I'm repeating myself a lot, but let's have a listen to the interview with Sophie where she talked a little bit about the transparency in politics.
I love listening to Sophie. Let's do that. I would love to welcome Sophie Mat to Crypto-Clothesline.
Thank you, abheeti. It's good to be here.
Sophie is a freelance writer and she writes about crypto and blockchain. She's particularly passionate about decentralization and how this ecosystem can serve humanity for good.
Thank you, yes. Sounds a little weird to think about, financial systems serving humanity for good, but that is a deep passion of mine.
I wonder if you could comment, Sophie, on the role of blockchain in politics, how blockchain may lend transparency to voting.
I agree. I don't have the technical know-how about how that could happen, but I do agree with the principle of using any technologies, particularly decentralized technologies, to help support a more transparent awareness of voting accuracy. And as far as the technical papers that I have read and the thinking of different commentators like Andreas Antonopoulos, who also speaks about this, I do agree that there is potential. We should be looking at the blockchain basically to support transparency with voting.
In our conversation with Dr Brad-Pettitt, who is the Mayor of Fremantle, he spoke about the transparency of blockchain also being of assistance for voters feeling that they are able to have a voice even between elections. So instead of, say, having to picket and have rallies and spend a lot of energy trying to raise awareness on issues that they want local government to address, that potentially blockchain could assist in this and make it easier for voters to get their ideas heard.
I think there are a couple of issues there. I would agree that blockchain could be a very important platform for voters to have their issues heard, albeit that does not negate, people having the rights of protest and other forms of, like physical overt manifestations where they want the issues to be heard widely. I think it's a tool. I feel it could be a very important tool. So how that would look, I don't know, but in principle, I feel that there is merit in exploring that further. So yes, I do lend agreement to what he does say about that matter.
Do you have any further comments in terms of decentralisation?
I do actually. So in terms of decentralisation, I'm really aware that what could be incredibly empowering about politics and decentralisation is using the blockchain basically as a ledger to reference political undertakings that they say they will do. Now, governments publish white papers and a plethora of other statements about what they say they will do, and yet the degree of accountability is actually pretty lightweight because it's buried under a lot of intervening distraction.
Okay, so what do we take from that? We take from that Sophie has done a lot of research and she sees things at a lot deeper level than most of us that are scooting along. And we never really look deeply into the implications of things.
In her Medium articles, because she writes a lot of amazing articles and they're so concise.
She's a practicing Buddhist, but she, and one would get sort of stereotypical impressions of somebody sitting in the Om yoga position and being almost like... I don't know, not somebody who's generally outspoken, but she's so kind, but she's also she's got a laser focus when it comes to writing about the truth.
Speaking of the truth, we also interviewed Bonnie Yu. She's a lawyer, and we interviewed her on her ideas as well about peer-to-peer trading of power. And I think her position is a bit different, and she's very direct as well.
Well, that's what I love about Bonnie as well, because we talked to her about the Tycoon project, and she's since told me yesterday she's involved in a series of other projects. Well, why does that surprise me? Women in tech, women in blockchain, there's such a fertile space. And she had some pretty telling comments about actually there being, according to her and other people that she's been studying with, there is no proof that electrons can be tagged. So in terms of the whole power ledger or the peer-to-peer exchange of solar power, that according to her, she said there's no proof that, say, for example, somebody has a generator in their backyard and that generator is a very non-sustainable way of generating power, and they could be contributing that to the grid, or you could be contributing power from your solar panels, but there is actually no way to know the source of the electricity, the source of the power. So that was throwing a spanner in the works.
It is throwing a spanner in the works, but at least it's still peer-to-peer and not buying off the big energy companies who are currently ripping us off, in my opinion, just saying.
I think her question came in the question of sustainability, and says she went on to mention that there is a way of putting a chip into a solar panel, and the chip can measure how much energy is coming in. You know, I'm not very good with all this tech stuff, but it was really interesting. And I've got to say, in his talk yesterday, Dave Martin from Power Ledger, and that was live streamed on Crypto-Clothesline Facebook group. So if anybody would like a Facebook page, if anyone would like to go and check it out, he actually addressed it in his talk.
He addressed the actual can't tag an atom stuff.
Well, it wasn't said in so many words, but he talked about some of the challenges of peer-to-peer trading of solar power. And I didn't put my hand up and ask that particular question because I didn't really feel like I had enough technical knowledge behind me. I'd only just had the conversation with Bonnie, but I would challenge you to have a listen to that and see if it hasn't been addressed in that conversation that he was having in that small group of people in Fremantle yesterday.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting. I actually mostly watched it to see you speak, Beatty, because you also spoke at that event. So a bit biased.
Well, I've got to say, all the boys spoke, and it was a room full of men. And when at the very last hour, Johnny Swanepoel of Blockchain Fremantle, who's a very outspoken man and calls himself a loudmouth bogan of blockchain, he just pointed at me and he just sort of thumbed the stage as to say, "You girl, you're next." And you know what? I just went, I'm so overcoming this intimidated feeling I've got of speaking in front of a whole group of men. And it was really cool. It was really nice. And I had about 3 men come up to me after I spoke and just said, "I loved it. I loved what you said." And I even got asked to another public speaking gig because they said it was really fresh, it was funny, and it was different to what everyone else is talking about.
You totally nailed it. You're amazing. And I loved your yellow shawl. You stood out, apart from, you stood out from all of those men in their black suits.
Well, everyone in blockchain seems to wear, black t-shirts and black jeans with their logo of whatever they're working on. And I didn't have that on. I was just me. But thank you.
Good on you. Let's have a listen to what Bonnie said. It is a bit juicy.
Very juicy. So we'd like to welcome to Crypto Clothesline once again Bonnie Yu, who is a co-founder of Consulary.io, a blockchain consulting company.
Thank you for having me.
Bonnie, you have been involved in a number of projects, including the one at Tycoon.tech, which is all around identity. You were also working on some new projects?
Yes, so I'm actually also working in the peer-to-peer lending space and with another company, which is an AI company that's looking to leverage blockchain technology also. So it's been a very interesting time.
So are you able to comment? This week coming up, we have an interview with Mayor Brad-Pettitt of the Fremantle Council in Western Australia, and they've been working rather closely with Power Ledger to do some experimental work in one of their suburbs, White Gum Valley, on the peer-to-peer solar exchange. Can you comment on that whole peer-to-peer network?
So as far as I'm aware, here in Australia, peer-to-peer trading that we're talking about now, it really didn't really exist because there was no legislative infrastructure that would support peer-to-peer trading. And as far as I'm aware, the way that Power Ledger is actually facilitating or bridging that gap is to bring retailers onto Power Ledger's platform. And by bringing them onto their platform, that would allow their customers to actually do peer-to-peer trading. But look, I think that there are really 2 main issues around peer-to-peer trading. And the first is that ultimately, when you do this type of trading, because it's still electrons, you're really still restricted by a physical location, and it's really limited by poles and wires and how each household is being connected, or if they're connected to the main line at all. And also, I think that one of the biggest issues is also that the provenance of the energy generated could be unclear. So you cannot actually decisively prove that the power that you generated was actually from a solar panel. So you could imagine a scenario where, someone could have a generator at the back of their house and they're actually pumping energy into the grid and calling it actually clean energy. So these issues are not yet solved for.
And so how would that reflect on, say, a local council who are trying to take initiatives into gaining some recognition for sustainability? I know that Dr. Pettitt and Dr. Jemma Green actually have association both through their university degrees and through their connection in local government. So how would you comment on the fact that a council like Fremantle City Council are taking initiatives to boost sustainability through this new sort of technology?
I mean, I think it's a great initiative in the sense that solar energy, power generated through solar energy has until recently been very expensive. And so previously, not only is there not infrastructure supporting this type of peer-to-peer trading, but in fact, just generating solar energy is expensive. But luckily, we've seen costs come down over the past couple of years, which means that this is now much more feasible. But I guess, this is a great initiative, but still, again, it goes back to you can't really prove conclusively that the power you generated is from the solar panel, because there is really no way for you to tag electrons. So it is what it is.
Gee, that's a very interesting aspect that it hadn't been brought to light in any conversations that I'd had to date. So thank you very much.
Not a problem.
And we look forward to having your comments in the future on Crypto-Clothesline. It's wonderful to have your input on different aspects of blockchain technology.
Great. Thank you for having me, as always.
So Bonnie is an authority on so many different things, and it's really, really interesting to hear her perspective.
Bonnie, we've had Bonnie on before, and so I think she comes from a position where if you say that this is what your technology does, then you have to prove that that's what your technology is actually doing. So that whole can't prove that that an atom can be tagged, I think that's a really interesting point that she's made.
Well, do you know, she's actually a blockchain consultant. She's got her own consultancy business called Consulero.io, which we'll put them in the show notes.
Wow, I totally didn't know that.
So she's not actually working for Tycoon, well, she's consulting for Tycoon, and she drew that to my attention yesterday. She said, I'm actually consulting on a number of projects, of which Tycoon is one. She totally rocks. Shall we listen to the interview with Brad Pettitt?
Welcome, Brad Pettitt, to the Crypto Clothesline. We're really thrilled that you can join us today.
No worries.
Okay, let's get started. I want to hear about this development in Fremantle. We did get a little bit of information when we were chatting with Dr. Jemma Green a while ago about the project that's underway, but could you give us a little bit of insight as to what is being constructed or has been constructed in Fremantle?
Yes, certainly. So, in fact, this project in many ways is a bit of an evolution of something we've been doing in this space for a little while in Fremantle around trying to make our cities more sustainable with a greater use of renewable energy, but using some of the emerging technologies around blockchain technologies and the like to actually do that. So maybe it's useful to start with a little bit of a background. We have been a project called WGB, which is in the suburb of Whitegum Valley, which is a suburb of Fremantle where we are. And that ended up being a very good demonstration project on how we could create suburbs, sustainable infill development. It's not a huge development, it's an old school site, which they totally redeveloped. And what that has done is actually demonstrated how we can use solar and batteries and actually start to radically reduce the carbon footprint of dwellings. And I guess what we're doing now is the stage 2 of that. How can we start to trade power behind the meter and actually create even greater incentives for these kinds of things?
Wow, that sounds amazing. I'm so excited. This is going on in my backyard.
Yeah, look, it is really, really exciting because there's a real sense that we're on the cusp of something quite big where all of a sudden housing doesn't have to be housing. Historically has had 20% of our carbon footprint comes from building and housing, and what we can do if we get the new generations right is actually our houses can actually be part of the climate solution rather than part of the climate problem.
Wow, that's exciting. How does that work then?
I guess one of the big changes that's happened over the last decade is we've seen the price of solar PV rapidly climb. Now it's very affordable. In fact, I think anyone who is building a new house would be pretty obvious that you should put it on your roof. We actually mandated it in this White Gum Valley development at WGV, so all of the houses have solar, and many of them actually have more solar panels on the roof than they can use. And this is where it gets interesting, because what we can see now is that these houses actually become zero net positive in terms of the energy that they're reducing and in terms of their carbon footprint. And then the question is, how do you export that and benefit from that? Now, historically, what's happened is that power has just been kind of sold off or sent to the main grid at a very low price, and actually the return on investment can actually be quite low and diminished as a result of that. But some of the new technologies that Power Ledger has been talking about actually enables, quite excitingly, people to trade this power between them before it gets sold onto the main grid, and actually creating even more of an incentive for investment in solar and battery.
So, Brad, would you be able to explain how the users in White Gum Valley may in the future be able to trade solar power between each other? Does this mean that all the houses will be joined together or via some sort of network?
But they already are. This is the exciting thing. All houses are already connected to the grid and already using that. What we are doing and what's available now, though, is actually to have some of that trading, that peer-to-peer trading between those houses. The very first step, which was going back a step, one which got ARENA funding, the Australian Renewable Energy Grant funding, was actually some peer-to-peer trading just within an apartment building. That was really important too, because what that showed is that for the first time, there was a really great new incentive for people who have apartments. Often we're finding apartments weren't investing in solar power because they're part of a strata, and how you work out the ownership, who's using what power, when, and those kinds of things was very hard to manage. But with these new technologies and blockchain offering that really important verification process behind the meter, actually enabled that trading to happen. And now with his next Smart Cities project, he's taking that one step further. How can we trade between households all around the city of Fremantle? So we've just gone out, in fact, via a public survey, trying to get people all across Fremantle, different house sizes, different apartments, all to be involved in this very broad trial around both trading water and trading power.
Oh my gosh, that sounds awesome.
How is Abheeti going to be able to get involved in this? Because I can't, which sucks, but she can definitely get on board.
Well, and further to that question, I love that question, Amy Rose. How does this affect renters? There's a whole chunk of us in Fremantle that aren't homeowners. So how does that affect us?
Yeah, that's a good question. The reason it's a very important question is because there's been, again, no motivation for people who either rent or people who rent their house out to invest in solar power on those houses, because obviously the person who's investing is different from the person who's using the power. What this, again, enables it to do is because the blockchain technology enables that process of verifying who the users are, when they're using it, and that trading between households. It's actually a really good motivation for the house owner, whether they're living there or not, to actually do that. And you can imagine it's worth the owner of that house, even if they've got renters in, actually investing in solar power, and then the people who live in that house can also benefit. The other way around, if you're a renter, you can actually start to buy renewable solar power off somebody else, even though you don't have solar power on your roof. I've got someone down the road who's using more solar power than they can use, and I choose, rather than buying my power from a coal-fired power station, I'm going to buy it off them and help my friend who's invested in that. So actually, all of a sudden, it's a really exciting way of kind of actually taking the need for having it on your exact roof, because you can actually buy it from whoever you want to buy it from.
That's really interesting, because if there's a way that we can incentivize property owners who are using it in an investment sense, people who are leasing out their properties, to actually be able to access this solar power. Because, I mean, let's face it, most property owners, as a renter, you often experience the feeling that they don't even want to fix a tap, let alone spend a couple of grand on getting solar power panels. It feels like it's a no-win situation. But the way that you're explaining it, it feels like there is more chance that these people, especially if they're sustainability minded, they would be willing to opt into that for the long term.
Oh, absolutely. And I would even go one step further. Even those who aren't sustainability minded and are merely commercially minded, I think we're almost at a point now where renewable energy is so cheap to produce and such a good investment that it just makes commercial sense, as well as sense from a sustainability perspective.
Oh, and pardon the pun on sense.
And also, another pun, it's giving power literally back to the people. It sucks that it's so far away from me.
So what we've got, though, is this grant from federal government, and there's an opportunity for us to prove it up. And what we expect and plan to do is be able to show how this can work. And then I expect that we can start to see this roll out across suburbs and cities all around Australia.
So how does it work?
It fundamentally changes how we understand the power grid. I mean, the power grid has historically always been something that simply takes power from a coal-fired power station, it sits out in a semi-rural area away from the city and gets it to your house. But actually, that grid is really important, but its function will now fundamentally change. As those coal-fired power stations are shut down, what it will be more and more about is actually about trading renewable energy between households.
So locally.
Yeah, that's right. So it'll all be locally produced and traded and shared. And the grid's vitally important still because you need to be able to share it between who's producing it and who's using it. I mean, some people will be home using lots during the day, others won't be home, but they'll be producing lots on their roof. And so it's about all of those kinds of... So the grid's still vitally important, but it serves a very different function and a much more sustainable one, a much more decentralised one that, as you said, hands power back to the people.
Brad, are you experiencing any friction from the power companies because of this, or are they embracing it? And if they are, why?
It's interesting. So, look, it'd be fair to say there's been a lot of resistance for some time. I think we've now reached a point where they understand this is the inevitable future that they need to be part of. In fact, the major power companies here, which are Synergy, which is a major retailer, and Western Power, which is the major owner of the poles and wires, are both part of this Smart Cities project.
Oh, excellent.
Fundamentally going to change the whole way we understand how power is produced and shared in Australia, and I can see it having ultimately global implications.
Especially for those countries, and there are a lot of third world countries around the equatorial belt. Does that mean that those countries could potentially benefit from this technology, say more so than countries that are further away, or is that just me thinking outside?
No, absolutely right. In fact, what's really exciting is obviously there's still a lot of countries, especially, as I say, along the equator, that where a lot of people don't have access to electricity still. So, I mean, thinking, obviously Africa, India, parts of Southeast Asia. And what's really exciting about this is it just further enables us to leapfrog old-fashioned centralised coal and gas-fired technology and go straight to renewables, straight to decentralised renewables that can actually operate at a village level, operate at a household level, but also, importantly, share that power between households and between villages.
Oh my gosh. It feels in one sense absolutely logical and in another sense really futuristic, but also like a big sigh of relief from the point of view of humanitarianism.
Yeah, that's right. I quite like that idea. I think maybe this is what the project should be called, is empowering. I quite like that, just to continue with our little puns for the day. But it's true.
Brad, it seems like this collaboration that you have with Dr. Jemma Green, like together you've done amazing things. But could I ask, I don't know if it's too personal, how did you two come together? Because from doing a little bit of stalking, which I'm known to do, there is a little bit of a background, but I couldn't quite get from the internet exactly what it was.
Jemma and I have crossed paths in a few different ways. Before I was the mayor here at the City of Fremantle, I was the Dean of the School of Sustainability at Murdoch University. And Jemma has similarly been doing her PhD at Curtin University in a similar area of sustainability. So there's certainly a lot of cross-fertilisation and discussion between the two universities and within the sustainability field. And then, interestingly, Jemma also was at the City of Perth for a while. So she's been a really important ally around actually how we start to take these ideas, which, often they're hard to get out of universities, out of academia, but also bringing them to a practical reality. And that's what the great thing about, well, I think you can do it at local government level especially, is it's a nice way where you can actually just put into practice some of the things that we've been thinking and talking and researching about.
It's perfect. I like the collaboration too. I'm thrilled, especially because I live close to the City of Fremantle. That's a really, really powerful concept, I think, Brad, because don't you agree that is one of the biggest issues we have across the board, is getting things out of the ideation stage and past the sort of antiquated thinking habits that people have, the skeletons that we're clinging onto. And this new technology, this blockchain technology, is powering us into the future. There's another pun. God, it's very exciting to take it from the theory into the practice, because I feel like in the world of academia, in the world, we can have great ideas, but it can sometimes be so difficult to get it past the dinosaur thinking so that it becomes a practical application.
Yeah, that's right. And what's really important is taking these really exciting new ideas are happening and using them to solve real world problems. I mean, I think that the climate challenge is one that is huge and one that does require some radically different thinking as how we power our cities and how we start to address some of those really fundamental ways about how we organise ourselves. What's so great about rapidly declining price of solar, declining price of batteries, the new emerging tools that we've got with blockchain is all those coming together actually are going to see a fundamentally different way of powering our cities and a major solution to the whole climate battle that we've got in front of us in a really good way. And that's really exciting.
Absolutely. And how do you see on the whole, I mean, I know that you're specialising in solar power and blockchain technology, but do you have a bigger view or a broader view of how blockchain will affect the world in other ways?
I don't pretend to be an expert on this at all, but I do think that it is a technology that does enable decentralisation across the board. The ability to verify in ways that don't require centralised institutions that we've always relied upon is a fundamental game changer. We're obviously seeing it in the example we've talked about today in the power sector, but you can imagine it just transforming so many parts of our lives. It'll be interesting to see how quickly that evolves and how quickly we make that shift. It feels to me a little bit like we're on the cusp of a shift from someone like who has a large CD collection, which is largely relevant. That shift from hard kind of things to a much more virtual kind of world. Everyone now streams music and doesn't buy music, and it feels like a similar shift is kind of happening in this space as well.
That's a really good analogy. I love that analogy, moving from basically CDs to MP3s, and from there it'll just be streaming probably out of our ears by itself.
And streaming is amazing because now you have access to every song you've ever thought of instantly, and it's so much better. And you kind of think to yourself, how weird was it that I used to rely on trying to find that CD that I wanted to listen to?
I still listen to CDs.
That's why she went so quiet, because she just wanted to be
No, I was just thinking back to what I said about dinosaurs.
I do have a juicy question, because I've been reading a lot about how the voting system is going to be impacted by the blockchain. Have you heard about that? Are you going to embrace that?
From a democracy perspective, it's really interesting because you can imagine where instead of us going to the polls once every 4 years, where people can be involved on a much more regular basis as to how they want to influence their community. That for me is great. That's actually what a good society should be about, rather than just palming these things off. Again, it's all about decentralization. It's all about going back to actually people, individuals, having more say more often.
Wow, that's interesting.
I have to agree. If I felt like I was going to have a vote and I knew absolutely that my vote was going to be very clear and there forever, even, for centuries, which is what the blockchain will enable, I would be more inclined to be more involved in that sort of system, because it does feel like going back to the power to the people. It would feel like, you are having that power back in your hands.
As I said, I'm no expert on this, but I feel like I'm just starting to imagine the potential of some of these things. And I think we're all trying to get our heads around a little bit as to how it works, what it will look like. But yeah, there's no doubt there is extraordinary potential that I think transformative of our whole society.
I wanted to make the comment too, Brad, that it's really refreshing to speak to somebody who is in local government, because from the perspective of, say, being on the outside, being a consumer of government, if you like, being somebody who deals with the government in terms of, almost as a subject, you get the impression that governments on the whole are really putting their hands up as if to say, no. Like with the whole decentralization, it does feel like in many ways power is potentially being taken away from the authorities that to date have been largely controlling of us and our lives, and that people on a ground floor level often don't feel that they can really influence any real change. Or if they do, they have to create mass movements and demonstrations. And
that's right, because there's no other way of influencing in between elections. But now there is, and it'll be interesting to see how much politicians are willing to give up that power and how much they are willing to decentralise and actually give the re-empower communities to have a say on different aspects of their lives via that democratic process. But I think it will happen, and I think it will become the new normal, just in the way that trading power between households will become the new normal.
Yeah, it's almost like, as you've done in conjunction with Jemma Green, like the birthing of these different ideas that are having a practical application because of the technology that's now available and developing. In the same way, we can see a birthing of a new way of governing, a new way of taking care of people and people taking care of themselves, instead of keeping the government responsible and moaning and groaning all the time.
That's right. And in fact, it is. And that's, coming back to the idea of empowerment, it really is empowering for people to have greater control over their own lives, but also greater sharing of information and greater sharing of different resources at different times. It's at the heart of it. It's a much more efficient way of working and a much more efficient technological framework. And that's another thing that's really exciting about it.
Mm. So I don't have solar power. How can I be involved with the Smart Cities project?
Well, actually, one simple way is that we're having this Friday, if you're around, they are having a open day kind of community information session down at WGTV Friday afternoon from 3:30 to 6:30. Love to have people like yourself down there, even if you don't have solar power on your roofs. I'm going to be down there saying a few words as well from 4:30.
Okay, excellent. And where exactly is it? White Gum Valley?
So WGV will be at the Sullivan Hall, which is on Stephen Street in White Gum Valley, corner of Stephen in the name. And it'll be a really good opportunity for people to find out about the Smart Cities and Suburbs program that Fremantle's involved in, and this particular project around using blockchain technology to make more sustainable suburbs and cities.
Great. I'll come down, and perhaps later on I'll get some sort of link from you so that we can be adding that into the show notes, but also for other people locally to join us.
Fantastic. Excellent.
And just quickly too, I see that Blockchain Fremantle has been formed by Johnny Swanepoel. He apparently...
Yes, Johnny Swanepoel. Yes, Johnny's full of energy and enthusiasm, so I'll go down and have a chat to them at some point as well. So but he's very good at getting together and doing all that stuff. He's full of enthusiasm, so... I think they're meeting on Friday as well, actually. So
they have their tech lunches on a Friday. I actually teach at a local school on Friday. I'm an early childhood teacher. That's a bit of a bummer, but anyway, I'll see if I can make it there after hours once or twice.
Yeah, that'd be good. Okay.
Yeah, I think that was a really succinct and juicy interview. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. Nice to be involved. Thank you very much for the opportunity. If you need any links or any background information, I can send you that stuff as well.
Thanks, Brad.
Pleasure.
And thank you very much for joining us on the show.
No worries. My pleasure.
Wow, I wouldn't have thought that a conversation with somebody in local government would have brought up so many interesting topics.
Well, neither did I. And I also never thought that a local government, a little tiny one like Freo or Fremantle, could be home to such revolutionary technology and spending billions of dollars or millions of dollars, however much is being spent, out of their budget for this blockchain technology.
They're spending millions of dollars or billions of dollars. I wish we knew which. But there's also the fact that Brad mentioned that they've got funding from the federal government. So from a national level, they've been sent funding to trial this new Smart Cities and Suburbs, which is all around sustainability, which is all about educating people. And what I thought was really juicy was the bit that he talked about where renters, obviously because it's relevant to me, where renters can benefit by this whole solar power becoming more accessible to owners, like being more accessible cost to owners of investment properties, meaning that they will potentially put solar power, batteries meaning that they will potentially put solar power panels in rental homes, not only for sustainability reasons, but also for commercial reasons, like it's actually making them money.
It also sounds like, did Brad say that it's mandatory in White Gum Valley, which is where the Smart Housing Project is?
I don't think he said the word mandatory, but he said that every house has solar panels. So it sounds like, because he mentioned that the work with Jemma Green was stage 2. So it sounds like stage 1 actually started a couple of years ago before this whole Power Ledger thing was birthed. And that the Power Ledger technology, or the application of the blockchain technology through Power Ledger, is a natural evolution of what they've already created. So it sounds like a group of houses that are all using solar power as part of a community initiative.
It sounds quite successful. From what I've heard, the Power Ledger company has moved international now because of what they've been doing with the city of Fremantle. So it sounds to me like it's successful enough to move on to other parts of the country, which might be why Brad was, so optimistic about it going national.
International. Mm.
Oh, well, he said like other parts of the country.
Yeah, it's almost like this sort of baby step evolutionary process, isn't it? We start off somewhere small, We're talking to a group of people that already have a sustainability initiative, because he did talk about the fact that he and Jemma Green had crossed paths in various ways, both academically in terms of their sustainability studies and representation, but also within local government roles. And it looks like that was the fertile, natural place to start. And if that's working well and we can iron out some of the greeblies, then we can take it further. I mean, Power Ledger, from what I've seen in the media, is involved in Thailand. It's doing trials in Japan. It's got stuff happening in Puerto Rico following the tragedies and the devastation of Hurricane Maria and Irma. So they're really looking at how they can not only take a natural disaster, which has wiped power from all these remote communities, but also how they can actually make that peer-to-peer trading work for local companies so that they're not losing their workforce across to the mainland. So people and their businesses are not fleeing across to mainland USA to get away from the unreliability of the power situation in Puerto Rico.
Wow. When did this happen in Puerto Rico?
Well, 2017, there was Hurricane Irma and Hurricane Maria, and these two hurricanes were off the coast, but they devastated tiny islands. St. Martin was the island that Tycoon.tech are working with as a trial for their blockchain information and recording identity, the work we did with Bonnie Yu. So it's interesting because all these paths are crossing now. The more that we talk to people, the more that we're learning about how all these circles are touching each other. So St. Martin is one of the islands that was devastated with Hurricane Irma and Maria. Now, apparently something like 84% of Puerto Rico's power has been reinstated, but these distant rural communities are still living in darkness after, well, it's been 7 months.
7 months.
8 months. Yeah, since September. So
that is so horrible. Well, what was their power like before that? What did they have? Solar?
I don't know about the history of their power. I know that every year around hurricane season, things are pretty dodgy, but it takes so much time to rebuild all the infrastructure and rebuild the power. So these people have literally been living without power all of this time. And so what Power Ledger are doing is they've struck up a partnership with a guy called Dante, and I can't remember his surname, but it'll all be in the show notes. And he works as a specialist in some way with the grid, and he's basically working, I think, to represent Power Ledger in the Americas. And this is their first initiative, is to get power back into those remote rural communities.
Wow.
But not only to get power back into those remote rural communities, but to help the local government, or I don't know about the government, to help local business monetize that. So there's actually an initiative to sell power to each other, and that's going to keep people there, not fleeing to the mainland, whereby the country's economy gets even more crushed. Add to that Bonnie Yu and her work with Tycoon.tech, and they're going into those communities and saying, okay, you've lost everything, your houses are devastated, all your local government official, buildings are devastated. Instead of having to reinvent how they record their identities, Tycoon are going in as their trial area to say, okay, we're going to say that a community member recognizes this person as who they say they are. Red Cross are coming in to recognize and say, yes, this person is who they say they are. We record their personal identity on the blockchain, and it's done and dusted for life. So they're not having to redo it every time there's a cyclone that wipes out the community. It's seriously, like that analogy of the stone in the pond and the ripples touching all these different shores. It's literally what's happening.
Sounds like Puerto Rico is the place to go then for blockchain?
Well, it sounds like they really need the help, and blockchain is actually one of the amazing ways, another example of how technology is stepping in with human intervention, of course, to solve some problems that are perennial, that are existing all the time.
All right. Deep. Okay. That was our interview with the Mayor of Fremantle.
So everything from Fremantle to Puerto Rico and back again, and the equatorial countries. It's really fascinating.
It's all connected.
It is all connected.
It's a blockchain.
I shall see you next week, darling.
Ciao. Bye.
Bye.
Are you struggling to find a safe place for your massive store of cryptocurrency? Do you feel anxiety thinking about your Bitcoin being eaten by a massive exchange? Then you're in the right place, because we're giving away a Trezor from Australia's premium hardware wallet distributors, CoinStop. And all you have to do is subscribe to the podcast and leave us an awesome review on iTunes that will be judged by the team at Blockbox on the 28th of July. Terms and conditions can be found at www.crypto-clothesline.com/Trezor. Good luck!
Hi, you've called abheeti
and Amy Rose
at Crypto
Clothesline.
Leave a message after the I don't know why you ladies have to talk about all this, digital currency or whatever it is that they're talking about on the news and stuff. I just think it's just a complete crock, a load of codswallop. I'm a little concerned that two grown women like you two are taking out so much time to talk about such a lot of hot air. I think we can all agree that the only way we're ever going to be paying for things in this lifetime or any future lifetime is with cash, and I don't see the relevance of talking about whatever it is that you mean when you say, crypto or whatever. It's just all a flash in the pan, in my opinion. It's just my 2 cents worth. Thank you.